Hey, thanks for tuning in for another episode of the ReMinders podcast. So today I'm welcoming on my friend Kim. So Kim and our friend Nicholas make up a musical duo called Frequency Matters. Nicholas plays guitar and loops his musings on guitar while Kim creates a fundamental atmosphere of crystal singing bowls. So she brought a few of those over and we did a brief grounding meditation before starting our conversation, which was really a beautiful way of grounding our energies into a shared moment intentionally. And I really feel like it helped harmonize the conversation. Kind of inspired me to maybe carry that on for future episodes, future conversations and everything. So super cool. It was a really lovely conversation. We intended to dance around the topic of fear and faith. And I think we did that to an extent, maybe not as clearly as we may have intended or as focused on the fear aspect. We were kind of more speaking to the faith aspect. So more than likely I'll have Kim on again, and she had a story that she wanted to tell about her experiencing, an overcome of fear, overcoming those self-limiting beliefs that keep so many of us caged in our comfort zones. So I definitely want to hear that story. We didn't quite get to that in this episode. But yeah, we talk about, she speaks about motherhood, about, just her thoughts on overcoming, or at least beginning the healing process of trauma before raising kids, which I thought was a super admirable move. I've thought a lot about that in my life, and we talk about that. She just generally tells about her spiritual journey, and we get into a bunch of tangents and beautiful dwellings on the path, and just good conversation, and I hope you enjoy. I think I'm gonna put the latest Frequency Matters in the background here called Stepping In. So let's dive on in.
Take a nice deep breath. Coming into this state of presence. We thank you for being here, and I am thankful to be here. May our discussion today be grounded and rooted with intention. May I speak from a place of love and thoughtfulness. May the words that come out of my mouth be guided by Spirit. May they flow effortlessly with ease and grace. And may they be exactly what a listener out there needs to hear today. There are no accidents. Nothing happens by chance. All is orchestrated from a higher dimension. There are only synchronicities and miracles and divine alignment. May the Divine Spirit be very present with us in this room, in the space of the listener, and in our hearts. May we be guided by this presence of unconditional love and grace. Our intention for today's conversation is to discuss the topics of fear and faith. May I release the fear of saying something awkward or stupid and just allow the flow to come effortlessly.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you very
That was
much,
beautiful.
Shen. Thank you. The bowls are always beautiful.
Absolutely. So we have, which ones did you bring up?
I brought out the root chakra, the throat chakra, and the crown chakra.
Gotcha.
And these are all tuned to 432 hertz.
How long have you had these?
I got them probably 2017,
Okay.
like January,
Nice.
maybe
nice.
2018. I
Okay.
don't know.
Not-
Years
not too
are
long.
hard for me to remember.
Yeah.
When you live in timelessness.
I know. I was
Just
talking to
kidding.
my
I
I was
don't.
talking to my little brother for
I
the
stretched.
last episode that we did, and we were talking about 2014 for whatever reason, and we were like, yeah, so you would have been 8 years old, so that was like half your lifetime ago. I was like, 2014, like that feels like just early adulthood for me, just a few years ago.
Yeah.
Time is a funny thing.
It is. It's nuts.
Yeah.
My daughter would have been 1 year away from being,
Gotcha.
but I would have had a 1-year-old son. But my
Yeah.
children, I really think, have like catapulted my journey.
Yeah,
It's
no
been
doubt.
really amazing.
No doubt. Yeah. I wanted to ask you too. Well, first of all, thank you for doing that. I always find that to be a really beautiful, grounding exercise. That was the shortest one that you've ever done. with me
I
in
know.
the
I
room.
think I deserve a medal for that. Like I've never done one so short. But thank you. Yeah.
Well, it still does its job. Usually you take us all the way up the chakras and back down.
And back
it's a
down,
very
and I get
transcendental
lost
experience.
in the time at that point. I'm like,
Yeah.
how long?
Yeah.
Like I just get like I lose myself all the way.
Yeah. Which
They're
is a good
amazing for
thing.
that. Yeah.
Good thing, yeah. Find another aspect of yourself, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But I was thinking, man, I should do something like that before like every podcast. Just
Yeah.
like a little intentional something. I mean, I do have a practice that I've started doing in the last, I guess, since 2020, but I'm not super consistent with it. I may have told you about this. Have I ever talked to you about insos? Have you heard
I don't think so.
So what that is I believe it's a Zen Buddhist practice
Okay.
of using a paintbrush, like a large paintbrush, and basically they're, on a superficial level, they're drawing a circle, or they're
Okay.
painting a circle. But
Okay.
it's this whole process of like bringing the paintbrush to your temple and like really putting your intention into it, like clearing, like waiting until your ego monkey mind has sort of dissipated a little bit.
Wow.
And
So you move
just-
the paintbrush kind of up, or you
Yes,
start down
So,
and then you
so
move
I'll
it up.
walk you through the whole thing. So
Okay.
you have the intention of doing this practice, and you've got your materials, whatever, the canvas or paper
Okay.
or whatever it may be, your paintbrush. Bring the paintbrush, all locked and loaded. It's got the paint on it. You bring it to your third eye. You center yourself. You like
Okay.
breathe into the paintbrush, and once you feel like you've sort of quieted the monkey mind a little bit, you aim it towards your page, go make a yeah, and you just slam it down into the thing, and then just let the flow
Cool.
kind of flow this circle.
Huh.
And so it's a pretty cool image where you'll see like the splatter where it
Mhm.
started, and then just it's sort of trailing off in the tail.
I think
you
I've
know?
seen that.
Yeah, you
Definitely
probably have
seen
seen
it,
that
but
image.
didn't know what I was
yeah,
looking at. That's
yeah.
cool.
So I try to do like a short version of that before, recording a take of something, or mostly with music. I haven't thought too much about doing that before podcasts, but yeah, I mean, it's a good practice, you know.
Yeah, so as frequency matters, Nicholas plays the guitar. In 432, I play the singing bowls, as you know. We always start with going through that grounding through each chakra, connecting with earth, connecting to source, and then coming back to the heart and setting the intention that everything that flows through our fingers is guided by spirit.
Yeah.
Almost like washing away the ego, human self, from that experience. And so obviously the setting the intention is really important, but allowing that whatever wants to come.
Yeah. That's so cool. Yeah. I try to stray away from saying important. That's a word I'm trying to avoid using.
Overused.
It actually kind of bridges to this manifestation, if you want to call it, modality that I came across a couple years ago called reality transurfing.
Okay.
And basically their whole thing is a practice of how to intentionally align yourself with the timeline that you want to be on. You know, if there's an infinite variety of, you know, ways that we can live life, infinite timeline type of philosophy, how to be on the one that you want to be on. And it's a pretty cool practice. I haven't gotten too deep into it, but the one thing that like really stuck with me was their idea of importance, this principle of importance. Basically the idea is that when we put a lot of importance, a lot of significance into something that we do want or something we don't want, that's sort of a grasping energy.
Okay.
And so if we're dreading something we don't want, the dread is a negative emotion. The thing we don't want is a negative thing. So we're actually kind of attracting it by putting a lot of thought and emotion into, you know, that not happening being so important, right? And then conversely, if we really put a lot of importance into something positive, that's still a negative vibe, you know, still clinging towards something that we really, really want, you know, and by doing that, we're kind of pushing it away because it's a positive thing and we're holding it a negative thing, so we're kind of repelling it. So anyway, that's kind of a aside about why I try to avoid that word important, but I think it's a really valuable thing to do, what you're talking about, of really like setting yourself up to be intentionally a channel for just what needs to be, you know, to sort of like put the ego aside a little bit, you know, because obviously we're going to bring a little bit of ego and a little bit of personality into everything we do, you know?
And nobody's going to do it exactly the same way that I do it.
Right. And
so
that's
there's
a beautiful
definitely,
thing.
that uniqueness to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think I would do well to ground more into. You're reminding me to do that more often before any sort of thing. It is something that I did kind of start to practice with, like, maybe even when we were doing the language of light practices last year. I know definitely when I was in this band Soul Echo, that was
I like that name.
Me too. Yeah, I could tell you the story of how that name came to me, and since the band has sort of ended, it sort of fizzled in 2020. I had a moment of thinking about talking to the guys about like taking the name because it was my idea and it came to me in like a really kind of mystical experience. I was at a show that I went to on my own. It was this band called Me Without You, and they're like,
that's an interesting parallel there.
Yeah.
Me Without You.
Yeah, and it's all one word.
Thinking about that name, you keeping the band name. Me Without You.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, well that band name too, I mean they're kind of big into spirituality. They talk about a lot of different religious myths in their lyricism. There's a lot of Judaism, a lot of Christianity, Islam as well is represented in their stuff. So that band name is also sort of that like me without you, you know, that we are all kind of a connected entity, a connected being type of thing, even though on the surface, it sort of sounds like an emo, like me without you, you know,
I can't
like,
live without you,
yeah, type of thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, I was having this moment at their show where like I was kind of in the center of the audience, and the singer, it just felt like I felt this connection. I felt like, you know, that's a different version of me, like echoing it's his soul, and like I felt like I was the mirror, and that like
cool.
at the same time I created the experience as much as he did, and it just felt like this very connected like soul echo.
That's cool. That's neat that you bring that up, mirror aspect, because that was one of the things I kind of tossed around in my mind of sharing today.
Yeah.
That how like every person that we interact with is, if we see them as a mirror, how much exponential growth we can experience in a much shorter time in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Like, pretty powerful.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I want to say something about that, but
tangent.
To wrap up my initial tangent.
Go
Yeah, so I had a definite affinity and like personal relationship with that band name, Soul Echo. But anyway, I brought that up because like that band was a situation of just sort of like too many cooks in the kitchen. Like we were all very big musical personalities. Like we all were composers and stuff, and kind of all sort of wanting to take the band in maybe slightly different directions and stuff. And I was playing bass for the group, so like pretty early on, I just kind of like, okay, like I'm gonna be a support member of this band. Like I'm not gonna try to steer the wheel. So that was something I would do like in my car before getting into the practice space. I'm just like, I'm here to support, because we did have some like ego clashes, of like that too many cooks in the kitchen type of thing, which brings me back to your point of the mirror stuff. I've had like a few kind of significant ego clashes come up in the last month, and I always like, I guess you and I maybe haven't talked about this before, but yeah, that's a huge part of like my lyricism and just sort of the way I orient myself spiritually is like, yeah, I totally believe we're like sacred mirrors of each other, and that life itself is this sort of sacred mirror maze, and we're navigating this experience. And I think the default is, as you know, to be in this sort of ego identity of separation, that, we're an island away from reality, or that we're experiencing reality and we're like a component within it, rather than like, I don't know, I think of it more as like a garden, that like we're plants in a garden. Like you can't separate one plant from the garden, you know what I mean? Like it's an expression in and of itself, right? But it seems that our default way of looking at life is that we're somehow a visitor to the moment, to the planet, to, our families or whatever, that we came from somewhere else or something. But it's like, we're literally the earth, just like the plants and animals on the planet. Like we are literally a manifestation and an extension of the earth, which is an extension of the universe at large, But yeah, was there something you wanted to say about the mirror sort of?
Well, I just think it's when we put that lens on, that we can like it helps us to, I think, cultivate compassion and understanding, because it's different than empathy, right? Because you're listening to somebody else, but also like kind of filtering that through, what can I learn from their experience? And I had written in this old journal of mine that I found was that sitting in sacred circle with other women, I was able to learn from one woman across from me who lost their son, how, that I can be extremely grateful for my children, and it even more so from hearing her experience.
Right.
And another woman who had realized that she kind of had lost herself during the child raising years, that I'm like, okay, I don't want to have that same experience. What can I do now to make sure that I'm cultivating my individuality as a mother, as a person, and not waiting till I find I'm in her position.
Gotcha.
So,
at first I thought you meant that she didn't feel that she was really present in her children's growing up, but it was more so she lost her own individuality.
Codependent, like there's that codependency entanglement where it's so hard with kids, where you do everything for them and you almost become them, and then at a certain point though they're able to do stuff for themselves.
Right.
And it's like, how do you like step back into yourself and have those boundaries again, where it's like they needed everything from you,
Right.
but now they don't. So it's like this dance, but
Absolutely, and you could speak obviously a lot deeper to that than me. I'm not a parent, but like that is a pretty neat thing to. I mean, they literally came from you, right? Like they literally came from your body,
Yeah.
So you said you almost become them, but like they
Yeah.
almost started out as you, and what a sacred mirror, someone that came out of your body, that you have that much like more innate, deep compassion and like reflection, right?
Yeah.
From a genetic
it's
place.
intense because there's so much of my inner child wounding was illuminated by walking through those same moments with my children, but in a reverse role.
Mm-hmm.
And here I am walking out the role of what my parents did subconsciously, not even recognizing that I'm doing that, and then like re-wounding the child that was me. It's just it's convoluted and
I understand.
and it's like, wow, okay, I need to heal that part of me that I didn't even know was still there and wounded.
Yeah, you're bringing up such a good segue into fear.
Oh, good, because that was supposed to be our topic.
Oh, it's happening.
Yay.
It's happening.
Cool.
That's one of my biggest fears is to have children. That's a huge fear for me because of my own, experience as an ego and not wanting to not regurgitate, but not wanting to recycle the karma, and recognizing that like if I don't smooth out my own stuff, my own wounding and trauma, then I've noticed, I've observed that it seems like, in fact, I saw a quote on a meme at some point in life, and I'm trying to remember how to paraphrase it. It was basically trauma that isn't transcended is transferred. Something like that. I don't think transcended was the first word, but yeah, you get it.
Yeah.
It's, hurt people hurt people.
Yeah.
Heal people.
Yeah, until you heal the wounds, you're bleeding all over everything.
Exactly. Yeah, so that's been a huge fear of mine, is like not wanting to be someone who's just pushing that ball of karma further down the snow hill of the avalanche of existence.
And I think the most challenging part is that you will you will end up repeating that karma, but with enough awareness, you'll see, ew, I don't like the way that feels, and I need to change the way that I react. And I really waited to have kids because I felt like I had so much inner child wound that I needed to heal, and I'm like, I'm not passing this on.
Yeah.
And so I went through years of therapy to try to heal, and it was powerful, and I thought that I had healed, but it wasn't until like my daughter it was like she was the age that I was, yet I was not fully aware, because it was like before the age of 3. She's struggling to go to sleep, and I'm like, just go to bed. Like, Mama needs a break.
Right.
And I'm losing my mind, and I find myself like subconsciously like almost robotic, going through the motions of, oh, this is probably how my mom handled it.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I don't want to pass that on.
Yeah.
Okay, I need to look at this. Really need to look at this. And you'd think that like, oh, well, because I was treated that way, I should be able to have all the solutions, because I don't want to be treated that way, and I don't want to treat my daughter that way. But it takes a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work, but it's definitely illuminating.
I think that it can also, and I'm not a psychologist, I can't speak to too much depth on this, and like you said, it is convoluted, this whole being human and being an ego and what it means to be a parent and a child, and that dynamic, that we all have that dynamic within us, you know. I suspect that there's some level of us trying to reconcile and or heal situations by subconsciously recreating them. I think that happens in romantic relationships a lot.
Yeah.
I would imagine it probably happens in parental relationships too.
Yeah. I like the way you say that, because I have always seen it from like just a different perspective. Like, we're given the same situation until we figure out a different way.
Yeah.
Higher way. So I like that, kind of like the opinion putting on it, because it puts the responsibility back on me. It's like I'm subconsciously recreating this.
Yeah.
It's not just being given to me. Like, here's another test. Here's another test.
Exactly. Yeah. And like we were talking about with the sacred mirrors, you know, like I believe it's all us anyway. I don't, you know,
Right.
you and I are externalized forms of each other right now, but like in truth, which is to say like beyond time, like we are the same energy. We're the
Right.
same being, right?
We're all source.
Yeah.
Source created each one of us, and we came from there and we go back there, and I feel like we're each a different unique expression of that energy, so that source, God, however you define it, can experience this creation, his creation, through all these different perceptions, stories, lenses.
Yeah.
But yeah, like when you, I think, awaken to the fact that that is the energy that keeps you alive, and that you're living and breathing, and that this is like a symbiotic environment that we're all coexisting in, and you begin to like shed some of those ego layers and embody more source energy, then what's the main point? But yeah, like that's where it's like you can learn so much from each different expression. It's all you.
Right.
It's all different versions of you.
Right. Yeah, well, let me just put it this way. Like, do you feel like there's an end to the journey? Like, do you think we ever are? Two things I actually thought of. That's one question, if you want to focus on that. The other thing I was thinking was, you said that we start as source and that we become this creation and then we return to source. How do you feel about the idea that we never left source? So maybe you can choose which of those you want to focus on.
I don't have the answers. I feel like that's been like my lifelong
Yeah.
journey, is to figure this all out. And that's actually what started my like awakening journey, was like too many coincidences occurred, and I'm like, something's going on here that my human brain can't comprehend, and I'm gonna get to the bottom of it. And that's what started this whole journey for me.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I could see it being many different things, and I don't know.
Yeah.
I try not to like lock in
that.
too many certainties in things that can't be proven.
Sure. Yeah.
Because I think it's so important that we keep our mind open and consider different possibilities, but nobody has the truth. Nobody knows the true answer, but we can feel truth within ourselves, I do believe. And my intention is to get closer to that truth throughout my life.
I love that. That's a beautiful response. I feel very similarly. Like, I think that ultimately, like, all we really know is what's here and present, you know. So I have a similar personality. Like, I, you know, throughout my life was very much in that sort of seeking mentality since being very young. You know, it didn't necessarily take synchronicities to like activate me or whatever. I always had a sort of like, what's going on here, you know? And it was kind of neurotic, I'm sure, in certain phases of my life, you know, in adolescence and stuff, and early 20s and things like that. But I'm grateful that the last few years, like, I've really relaxed into surrendering to the mystery and just having fun, like flowing with the mystery rather than trying to figure it out.
Right. So what I think along those lines is that what I've really looked at the last few years is like, what makes humans different from other animals? That we have the ability to connect and communicate with others. And like, we can use tools, right? So I find so much joy in magic. Like, to me, it's magical when people get together and play in that space of like, I don't know what we're gonna create, but let's just see, when we each bring our own unique gifts. That's what I loved about Kentucky Yoga Fest when we were practicing his language of light, was that we were all in our own strengths and unique gifts, the coming together to create something bigger
Bigger than its parts.
and it
yeah.
felt like I could feel when we were really each one of us in our own flow,
Yeah.
and it sounded like amazing together
Yeah.
because we had that same intention, and it was really, really powerful.
Yeah.
I
totally.
tried to like not recreate like I'm reliving, but, like create spaces for people to come together in those spaces of play.
Yeah.
Like,
absolutely.
I think through art and music, where we really discover our true selves and what's really inside of it.
Yeah, I think so. I was just reminded of a memory of when I was living in Price Hill. I had this big tie-dye tapestry that Kara had made. We had a tie-dye party at some point. She tie-dyed a bed sheet, I guess it was. And so I'm just like laying down, like I don't know what I'd been getting into, you know, but I was probably pretty high vibing, so to speak. And I'm looking at this thing and just like listening to music or whatever, and I just, you know, sort of had this like transcendental moment of just like feeling the cosmic fingerprint in her art and in the music I was listening to, and it just really like imprinted me with this idea that art is, or at least can be, but I think like the best art is really a template or scaffolding for meditation, that it's a tool for meditation. Yeah, just
It's
was reminded of
fascinating.
that.
I've had when I create art, I always set an intention first,
Yeah.
and then it is fascinating to observe my mind throughout the process of creating, because I witness that inner struggle of like, good enough, and like having to like develop a inner voice that is nurturing and loving through that, so that I can get to the end and it's like it doesn't really matter what the outcome looks like, but
Yeah.
it's about that process of exploration and expression.
Right.
And I feel like that's really missing in our culture. Is we don't talk about that it's like it's about expressing what's inside of you. It doesn't matter what it looks like.
Yeah, totally.
Like we're processing outward, externally,
Yeah.
and we need that. It's
Yeah.
like you can really literally lose your mind if you try to do that all inside of your head,
Mm-hmm.
because you get in your head. And it's like the stuff that we're expressing is so emotional, and it's just so much bigger than our brains can comprehend. And I think that just picking up a pen, even writing, drawing, painting, coloring, like
Scribbling, like anything,
Yeah.
you know, just
And-
move your body, like.
and same thing with music. Like music is expression without words, which we try to define everything into words. And there's some stuff that we're feeling that like it just doesn't always have words.
Absolutely.
And I find words are tough.
Mm-hmm.
So
What do you mean by that?
I feel like I never can find the perfect word, and I wasn't really a big reader growing up. So part of it's probably because like my vocabulary is not that extensive.
Gotcha.
But I've always just felt like I don't have enough words to express this experience, the human experience, and all that I'm feeling inside.
Yeah.
So I often feel like I can't express myself fully. And so I really do like sound healing for that and setting intentions, because of there's a certain frequency that like you can't argue with that.
Yeah.
Can't argue with the frequency.
Right. You can ignore it, you know what I
Yeah.
mean, or not tune into
You
it.
can
But
set an
if you're
intention.
in tune with a certain frequency, yeah, you're right. It's working on a way that may be conscious, may be subconscious, you know, but you can't argue with frequency.
Right. And the same thing with intention. When you communicate with somebody else without intention, like we're perceiving through our own lens of experience all the things that have happened to us. We're processing what somebody else is saying through everything of our own experience.
Right.
Who the other person that we're talking to hasn't had any of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I find it fascinating to wonder, like, are you ever really on the same page with somebody? Because my husband and I think this was what makes us work, is that our brains think very different. So it's definitely a struggle because we have to communicate extra. We have to put a lot of effort into communication, because we could have the same conversation and come out understanding two
Right.
different things.
Totally, yeah.
So intention is so important for me, because if I set my intention to be loving or to be kind and compassionate, like, it's okay if somebody misunderstands me. I don't get hung up on that.
Right.
Like, I know that I intended to be, and sometimes the words that I mean to say just don't come out of my mouth. I'll say something completely off the wall, and I'm like, I didn't mean to say that. I don't know why I said that.
Yeah, there's a bunch of different avenues or angles of responding to you that are coming up for me. First of all, I'm curious if you know what your Mercury is in your astrology chart. Are you that privy to your chart?
I don't.
Okay.
No.
Second, Mercury's in retrograde right now, so it's kind of interesting that you're saying that. I think about this a lot. I think about how limiting language is a lot. And it's kind of funny, and it's actually come up in the last few podcasts. And I think it's an important thing to mention on a podcast, because I obviously put some sort of importance, value. I put some value into expressing verbally. Yeah. And I will admit, when you're talking, and I was sort of orienting myself to, you were expressing how verbal expression can be somewhat of a struggle for you, or at least not your clearest form of communication, I'll say, if that's fair. And I was thinking how I feel about that, and I guess on one hand I feel like I am a reluctant poet. I write lyrics, and I'm proud of the lyrics that I write. If I don't like them, I don't keep them, you know what I mean? I'd rather have a song be eternally unfinished than a trite lyric, So on one hand, I do feel like I have a pretty cool flow with words. On the other hand, I'm abundantly aware at how flimsy words and language are. Maybe in particular English. I only know English, but from what I've heard from other bilingual people, it seems like other languages do have somewhat of a little bit more of a nuance. But you're totally right. We all have our own vocabulary, our own association with a shared vocabulary, right?
Yeah.
We have our own relationship to these words. And to your point, a lot of times it goes beyond the actual syntax. A lot of times it's the emotion and tone that we have in the words that we're saying, and that's something that's a practice for me, because I definitely have had a bad habit of maybe verbally saying words that I would stand by, but my tone is not great. It sometimes can have more of a harsh well, it's just this, don't you see it? You know what I mean? That type of thing. And I can pretty clearly see where that came up in my upbringing and stuff. But yeah, so I think it's one of those situations where it's we gotta use the tools that we have, but what are we using the tools to do? What you do with the meditations, you're using your words to remind people to go within. That's what I'm trying to do with this podcast. I'm not getting up here in a position of authority that I know anything about anything. I'm just having fun talking about the things that light me up, and they're reminders to me. And I always feel super fulfilled at the end of a conversation. I feel I just tuned into some energy that was really valuable. Something that's gonna remind me to be more in tune with myself, with the self. But yeah. Anything to say off of that rant? Just wanted to throw all that out there.
I just always have found it so fascinating to think that we have words, but they still come through our own filters. So even the color red.
Oh my gosh, I've thought about that so much.
See red different than you see red, but we have the same word for it.
Yeah.
So we might think we know what we're saying. Yeah, you know what I'm saying. And I was there's no real way to say, do we really understand each other? And I just think that's...
Yeah, when I was in high school, I had that thought while not listening to whatever I was supposed to be listening to in class. I was what if my red is blue to someone else, right. But scientifically, red is a certain frequency, right? Or it's lacking a certain frequency, and we're perceiving the lack of red as red or whatever. I think that's
unless you're colorblind or your eyes perceive things that we all who knows.
Yeah,
just,
totally.
it's all fascinating, and we're all having our own experience, even
That's what I
when
was
we
about to
feel
say,
like
yeah.
it's a shared thing.
Yeah, which is a beautiful thing. You know, I think that when we're in a little bit more of like a more fragile victim mentality or whatever it may be, an unhealthy, more traumatized mode of being, you could say that to someone in that mode and they'd be like, turn it into paranoia.
Oh yeah,
You know?
like that's terrifying.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because
I never really understand anybody.
yeah, it feeds into the loneliness program, you know? But in the grandest scheme, like it's an extremely beautiful thing that we're all having our own experience. And then you would think that at some point it would relax our desire or grasping for validation, you know? Which I think it's pretty safe to say we all have at least a sliver of that. I think it is an authentic need to a degree, but I think there's a lot of excess importance put around that mirroring from other people, you know, and I think it just boils down to self-worthiness, you know, and if we feel grounded and in trust of our own existence, our own deserving to be here, you know, then it's fine. Then yeah, just have your experience. But so many of us have been programmed from such an early age that we need to prove our worth to earn our living and stuff like that. Yeah,
even love,
sure.
Something that's like a basic human need.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting to think about self-worth on a spectrum.
Okay.
Because you have like extreme unworthiness to like big-headed.
Yeah, sure.
Right? And it's like finding that humble, happy medium. It's not something that's taught. Can't say I've ever had a class about that.
Yeah.
You know, like how do you find that happy medium? And something that I've been exploring a lot lately is I feel like lately the theme that everybody's talking about is how to cultivate self-love. If you don't love yourself, then you know nobody's going to respect you. Nobody's going to treat your people are going to treat you basically the way you treat yourself.
Sure.
It's kind of what I've come to the conclusion.
Basically, no amount of external validation is going to scratch the itch if you don't internally validate yourself.
Yeah, and I think I personally have struggled with receiving love, and I've come to the conclusion that our capacity to receive love is in direct correlation with our capacity to love ourselves.
Sure. Which
you would think in an equation equals self-love. But to me, that's really hard. And one of the things I had written down in my journal a long time ago is, how am I supposed to love myself? I don't even like myself.
Okay.
Which is a very sad thing to say and admit, but I'm at a different place in my life. You know?
I've definitely been there, yeah.
And what I feel like is like a shortcut is to really tune into the love that our Creator has. And that fills me with so much more love than I have ever loved. Like, is it really self-love or is it love from the divine?
Yeah.
Like, because that seems like easier to. I mean, of course, if you don't believe in God, that's real hard.
Yeah.
Hard one to grasp. But I think I believe we're all worthy of, and I believe we're all created with intention and purpose. And I believe that our Creator thinks real highly of each one of us. And if we can tune into that love that our Creator has for us, He designed us with all these flaws, all the imperfections that we have, for a reason. And He loves and accepts fully and unconditionally. If I can tune into that, that feels like I'm able to, I can open my heart. That's a lot easier than trying to just cultivate self-love. You don't really love yourself.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of how to approach that one. I'm trying to translate what you said into my language because on a energetic level, I totally get what you're saying. But I will readily admit that I wouldn't necessarily use the same language because I don't have the same
Sure.
positive associations to those words, even the use of like creator or like, you know, referring to God at all, let alone like I can pretty easily like, okay, God, spirit source, all that is the moment. To me, like God is the moment.
Okay.
That's my biggest like translation when I hear that word.
So we're opening a can of worms. Sorry about that.
No, it's good. It's a good thing to
Yeah.
discuss, you know? Because, I mean, like I said, on an energetic level, like, I really don't feel like we're not on the same page. So it's a good thing to break down those barriers, because there are barriers between, you know, there's culture wars of some sort, you know?
Yeah.
And it is kind of silly that it sometimes just boils down to language.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. But to your point, I'm trying to think of how I would say what you just said, and I think maybe, like, I really don't know. I would probably have to sit with it a little bit, but I don't know. I don't know. I guess the way I would say it is like having a, I don't know, I don't have a relationship to a creator. Like, that's not really how my paradigm is operating. But I guess if I'm gonna say that God equals the moment and that we are all like arising out of the moment, then I guess that's my version of saying that the moment created us, or that God created us and loves us. But I don't know. I'm gonna bookmark that part of the approach. Okay, so I'm gonna unbookmark that part of my response. If I hadn't been ego flailing from somewhat of lack of total resonance with the words that Kim chose to use, I think I would have more wisely posed a question. And I'm interested in anyone's response to this question. In particular, Kim, if you happen to be watching this and you want to comment your reply or how you would respond to this, I'm definitely interested in that. And the question being, what significant difference is there between self and the divine? You could easily point out the obvious that, you know, well, obviously, hello, we aren't all-knowing and can't do anything that we want. We're not these magical wizards of divine proportion, right? But I would argue that we're looking at our ego identity there, and that our essence is the divine. I don't see any significant difference there. And, you know, even to assume that the divine, to assert any or assign any qualities to that, to assume that there's something out there that is all-powerful, all-knowing, I think that's coming from a place of ego, a natural tendency to assume that the higher self is similar to this self, that it's a personality and it has thoughts and design and consideration and intelligence. I think those are all metaphors. You know, all of those words are metaphors. And so, yeah, I'm just asserting the claim that by externalizing divinity from ourselves, we're creating more division and sort of convoluting the atmosphere of spirituality, which I think already can get kind of complex and can easily fall into a situation of a convoluted nature, when I think truth, absolute truth, can be very simple. Not to say that I know all of the details of truth, but to me, the simplicity of truth is right here, right now. It's just that the one thing I can count on is this moment, this present moment. As much as I may get lost in my mind and thinking about the future or getting hung up on the past, I know that none of that's really real anymore. The only thing that's real is what's right here. And that doesn't mean that this particular moment with these forms and these contents are it, that this is the divine. I mean, it is, but it's not the absolute, right? But the infinite moment that holds space for all of the arising and falling, of the contents of awareness, the forms of awareness, the forms of divinity, the creations of God, if you will. All of those things we know are temporary. We know that energy cannot be created nor destroyed, but we do know that it's constantly rearranging itself. It's always moving. And that's, the Buddhist principle of impermanence, which we can all see in our lives. We know that we all have expiration dates and that everything on earth is shifting at all times, whether or not we're tuning into that. A lot of times we're clinging to things to stay the same, but that's going to create suffering because that's not rooted in truth. Nothing stays the same except for the infinite capacity that the moment holds for anything to arise in and out of. And so we're not separate from that moment. We are innately born of it. And I just am asserting that there really is no valuable difference between us and divinity. So when we say self-love or we say divine love, I think if we go deep enough, they become the same thing. And all that said, that's not to say that externalizing divinity to be able to, if that's what it takes for us to be able to see our worth and to feel that love, if that's what it takes, then who am I to say that that's wrong? I would never say that. I just wanted to clarify why that sort of threw me for a loop. So anyway, back to the conversation. On the other hand, I feel like what you're expressing is a beautiful example of how what I'll call religion, you can call it something else later if you like, how religion can be a template for getting on with the dang thing.
Yeah.
A template for self-discovery and self-love in this particular case, you know. So I guess I'll ask a question. So and what about? Don't be shy.
We like cats.
Yeah, we're on your level after all. So why don't you tell me about your relationship with the creator and how that has come about in your life and why that feels like such a real thing for you to ground your self-love into.
Yeah. Great question. I think it's really interesting how I've gotten here as well. I was raised Jewish.
Oh, okay.
I would definitely say that I never really felt my own personal connection to God until I was about in high school, and I went to a Jewish youth group camp, and it was just the kids. There weren't really a whole lot of adults there, and so leading the services on Friday night dinner or whatever, the other peers played the guitar, led the songs, and led us all in the music. And that is honestly the first time I ever felt my own connection to anything of a higher spirit, source, anything. Then. So
you were practicing within that religion.
I was.
In your childhood, yeah.
So I remember going to college then and having this conversation with my roommate late at night in our dorm room, just saying nobody really knows what the truth is. How can people kill each other over this stuff? This is, my perception versus your perception. Who's right? Who's to say who's right or wrong? Nobody's ever died and come back and had all the answers.
Yeah.
And so that really just kind of opened my mind to the fact that I don't really understand this all. And then I went, part of my therapy when I was out of college and in the workforce and trying to heal my past so that I could have children that were not re-traumatized.
Yeah.
My therapist had asked me about my faith, and I was like, I don't know, don't really have any, I don't know. And he suggested I read the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. And I can't recall any specific thing about that, book, but again, it opened my mind. And then I read.
Did you read the whole thing?
I think I read the whole book of the living.
Okay.
And then I got to like a little bit of the dying, and I was like, not ready for this.
Yeah.
And I don't think I ever came back around to it.
Okay.
But then I read The Power of Myth by Joseph Campbell, who talks about how all of the religions really boil down to similar stories. And there's always certain characters in each of these different religions, and here we are fighting over it.
Yeah.
And that
His
kind
thing
of like
is the monomyth, right? Was that reference in that?
It was so long ago,
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay, go ahead.
But that kind of deconstructed religion for me, in the fact that I'm like, I know that I am connected to a source, a God. Something created all this because I'm here. Like, that's evidence to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then it really wasn't until I began my awakening journey and I started to really explore, like, what is going on here?
Yeah.
There's too many coincidences to be coincidental.
Right.
And
for it to be random.
Yeah, and then I feel like I started to, like, see, like, things I wanted to paint, like visions, I guess. And I had seen, like, the sunflower, and I tried to paint that. And then I'd seen, like that, just the spiral, and I painted that. And then it was like, I was watching something that was talking about the Fibonacci sequence, and something clicked for me where I was like, this is scientific evidence that there's a divine creator. And I got so excited and so, like, lit up by this that I was like, this is my path, and I'm gonna keep following it. And that's how I found my tuning forks that are the Fibonacci. They're the the solfeggio frequencies.
Okay.
Which are based off of the Fibonacci sequence,
okay.
the golden mean.
Gotcha.
Because they create that spiral of life, and there's so many instances in nature that you see that same ratio.
Right.
And to me, I was like, this is not by chance. And really just started to connect with whatever I felt like was that source. And I called it source creator, source creator. And then I really started working with affirmations. And those were very powerful for me. And it seemed like things would work for a little bit, and then until they stopped working, which kept me seeking. And recently I've been reading the New Testament, and that's just completely eye-opening because of the way I was raised. Being Jewish, we don't really talk about Jesus. Right. And a lot of my questions were answered, and so now I feel like I am getting closer to the truth. But yeah, that's long story, kind of long, but yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Gotcha. So you don't necessarily identify with as a specific religious person? Like, would you identify as a Christian or something like that?
I don't.
Yeah.
I don't. I think that religion is man has twisted God. Yeah. And made it into religion. Yeah. So I don't really like religion. Not to say that one day I won't define myself in that way, but I feel like I don't really know enough of any of these to say this is what I am. Sure. Like, I have a lot of beliefs that I don't know if they fit into a box. Yeah. You know? Yeah. But I've got my own connection to source, and that's what I think is important, is that, like, people have said, you know, take time in your day to pray, and you know, go to church and all that. And I think that is a minimalistic way of living with God. Like, God's inside of me. Like, if I can tune into that more and become more aware of that, and I'm embodying that eventually. Like, that is my goal. And then when I play the singing bowls, my work has really evolved. And when I started studying the New Testament, I was kind of beating myself up a little bit, because I'm like, I haven't had any sound healing stuff in a while. Like, what's going on? This stuff's kind of like dried up. Do I still consider myself a sound healer? And all those 9 chatter things. Right. But it really was interesting, because all of a sudden, when something clicked for me with the New Testament and what I was learning, and I really kind of started to embrace it, I realized that my my views had shifted, and they were in kind of like a discombobulated place, like, and I considered myself somewhat of a spiritual guide before that. And so I'm like, how do I guide people? I don't even know where I am at. And so once it was really fascinating, because then things started to like book up again, and I've had a lot more like opportunities and work in this field. And when I'm tuning in and speaking from, like, allowing source to flow through me, I'm finding that I am holding people in this space of God's love. And I feel like that is where we can heal. The longer that we can stay in that space, the more that ego unravels, and the more that we see that, like, none of this is by chance. This is not random. Everything is orchestrated, and every person we encounter, every conversation that we have, there's meaning behind everything if we really look. Yeah, I really find it a powerful experience, and the words that are coming out of my mouth, it's like at one point in time might have seemed so cliche, and here I am saying it. But,
yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, getting people to that space of just relaxing into being held by source. It's just like so amazing. And then it's like when we go, we anchor to the earth, ground to the earth, and then all the way up, and then come back down. And when I'm coming back down, it's like we're surrendering our entire bodies to God now. Like, that's part of the practice, I feel like, is like giving your heart to God to love through your heart, giving your mouth to God to speak through your voice, giving your eyes to God to see through your eyes. And it's like I would never have said that before.
I hear ya. There's a lot that you're saying that really resonates, and there's some things that I am curious about you clarifying. I definitely resonate with what you said about religion. I think that religion, in a lot of cases, is sort of a fan club of someone who did the work,
Yeah.
So, like, Christianity, like, a lot of times it doesn't actually look too much like Christliness. A lot of times it looks like a Jesus fan club. Jesus was, if the Bible is at all accurate, if Jesus was even a historical figure, which to me doesn't really matter. But given that those are facts, if we're going to use that language, which not really my language either.
Sure.
But if the things I've heard that Jesus said are true, he was talking about how it's right here right now. He was saying that when he said that he's the Son of God, like, it wasn't about this parental thing. It was about, like you're saying, the creation of God, one with God.
Yeah.
And that intimate connection, not just that, like I make a painting and put it on the wall and never think about it again.
Right. Right.
Where it's like, no, like birthing someone, like an intimate, innate connection, like literally a part of me, I think that was the level of connection that he was getting at. He realized that he is God, but in those days you couldn't just go out and say that, because it would be seen as blasphemous, which is ultimately what happened, right?
Yeah.
Look at Buddha. Buddha is a person that tasted enlightenment, tasted nirvana, and he spoke about it. There's probably been countless people who have become enlightened and didn't speak about it and didn't have religions built up around them. I think so. These people were really bright lights, and those bright lights are going to attract people that are seeking light.
Yeah.
Also, it's going to attract some moths. It's going to attract some people that are, why are you shining so bright? Like in the story of Jesus, getting taken down by the government, essentially. My point is that I think that following a light can be helpful, like you said, to the point where it no longer becomes helpful, because you can only follow so far. At some point you have to embody.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that religion can be a distraction for a lot of people, especially in the ways that it's sort of still operating today.
You're still trusting somebody outside of yourself more than you're trusting yourself.
Yes, exactly.
And really, I believe it's like I'm trusting myself because I believe I have all the answers within, not because my human has the answers, but because God resides inside of me.
Exactly. And that was the other thing that I want to say that I really resonate with, is that what you just said, the divine being inside. That's my other like big criticism of religion in general, is that a lot of times it's externalizing. Not a lot of times, in Christianity, it's externalizing. There's a lot of religions that are really deep, and I'm not saying that Christianity isn't one of them, but Christianity in the West and America, like, it's the clearest example of an institution that has become corrupt, you know, and that, it may be built around some seeds of truth, but it's also been the catalyst of a lot of suffering and corruption,
deception and lies,
power, wrangling of the masses, and, you know, keeping us in a story and keeping us feeling separate from God. You know, so that's a huge criticism I have of Christianity, is the externalizing of the divine. Because you said that, well, to finish my sentence, I have a tendency to sometimes not finish my sentences, and then never circle back around to finish my point.
Guilty.
Yeah. Because I believe that, you know, I believe that we are divine, that we are the divine unfolding as these egos. So I understand what you're getting at when you say like creator creation type of dynamic, but like to me that implies that like it implies like a certain personality of divinity, and I feel like that's ego. Like I think that's, you and I are the personality of the divine. Like to me, I don't really see the divine as like an entity, like a creator, like a person,
right?
And
that's where I feel like, well, coming back to the language barriers, it's like I say the word God, somebody who had a bad experience in church growing up thinks I'm talking about the same thing as them, and they just shut down from it, and they're not open to it. Because I have heard so many people that are turned off by faith completely because they had a bad experience growing up in church, and it's like, well, let's redefine that. What maybe you were taught, maybe you were not taught the truth, maybe, I don't know. It's like, I don't know.
It has trauma associated with it, and I can totally relate to that. I mean, thankfully I don't have like deep trauma, like I wasn't abused by, you know, priests or something like that, but there are people that have been, you know, and
well, and I know that the whole conversation of like, oh, you're a sinner and all that, it just like comes with so much guilt and shame. But if you truly embody that divine aspect, then you can surrender the guilt and shame and immediately feel it being lifted from you. And that is something I've experienced, and that is powerful. And it's like, well, I know that I didn't do that, so there's something higher power than me that is at work here. But yeah, I feel like...
But don't you feel like you could identify with that too? You know, like maybe your ego can't take claim of that, but don't you feel that that higher power is also you?
Yeah.
Because that's where,
we're all
again,
one.
language, we say I, and we're referring to the ego, but just wanted to expand that.
I just think it's interesting to... I've always had to think a different definition of God than most people, because for a long time I thought God was, and I don't really know now what it is, but God is the force or the energy that gives life to all things, that like allows things to exist in harmony, and like lives and breathes through me, where I don't have to give conscious effort to it, but something is making that function. It's like, that's God. It's God that allows the centipede to crawl across the ground. Like, it's, that's God. And like everywhere you look, the trees, the wind that blows the leaves on the trees, like, that's God.
I totally agree. I'm just on the other side of the spectrum. I would say that there's no thing, like no hyphen thing making that happen, so like that's the only difference, is that I don't relate to God as a thing. I relate to it as everything.
Yeah.
And it's the nothing that is everything.
And I agree with that.
And that's a mystery, right? And that's
Right.
a paradox. And to me,
Yeah.
like, that paradox just ignites so much more like resonance within me than to say that this mythology is true, which I know that's not what you're saying, and I totally relate to a lot of what you've said about your path and your relationship to religions and to everything you've said. But I am curious, unless you had something you wanted to say.
No, go for it.
So what about the New Testament clicked so much for you? Was there anything particular that you could say about that?
Sure. So I haven't really shared this with too many people in my life that knew me growing up. So sorry, fam. My first question was, if Jesus is who they say he is in the New Testament, then why did the Jewish people ignore that or hide that from us for all these years?
Yeah.
And it was like, well, I was kind of taught that he was just, we're not saying he didn't exist. He was a human, but he was not the Messiah, because when the Messiah comes, there will be no more suffering on earth. Is the Jewish belief. So that was my big question coming in, is why would they say otherwise? They witnessed it. He was Jewish. He was from the religion. And the answer was very clear in the first, I've only read the book of Matthew so far, I've started on the book of John, but very early on in the book of Matthew, it talks about how the Jewish leaders were threatened by his authority. And knowing what I know about ego, it makes so much sense. They didn't like the fact that he came in and said, I'm the son of God, I'm the son of man. Yeah. And they're like, no, you're not. We're in charge here. You need to know your place, because we are the leaders. Because and everything that Jesus taught was about compassion and love, and not to get angry with others, and to accept everyone, and to help a stranger, and to like give the clothes off your back to somebody in need. And I'm like, I resonate with that. I don't resonate with the power and the authority. Yeah. The figures that wouldn't accept who he was, if he is who they say he was. Yeah. And so I kind of started out just being really open to what he was teaching, because I never had heard any of that before. I'm like, what he taught was beautiful. Nobody ever taught me that. So I was really open to it from there.
Gotcha. I just, it's bringing up something about, you said that from the Jewish perspective, that when the Messiah comes, that there would be no suffering. The way I see that, because I also feel that from the Christian mythology, the third coming of Christ, right? He was born, risen. And it'd be the third, right?
But I think they call that the second coming.
Do they? Okay.
I've questioned that too. I'm like, you mean the third time? They're like, no.
Okay, second then. Okay, well.
Yeah, because the firstborn, second was resurrect.
That's what I thought. Okay.
But
anyway, yeah. Either way.
Semantics. Here we go, language again.
Yep. Well, I always say, like, spoiler alert, like, it's you. Like, the next coming of Christ is supposed to be you. Like, and I think that boils down to the Jesus thing too. Like, Jesus, he probably did eliminate all suffering when he enlightened himself, but that's in his perspective. Like, if we're going to talk about timelines and multiple alternate realities that are all stacked on top of each other in the infinite matrix of the moment, then like he probably was on a different timeline than us, but we were still interfacing with him. That's really hard to talk about. Yeah. But I get your point that it's a power struggle, right? Yeah. So he had internal power, and the external powers, the government, obviously weren't cool with that. Of course, the religion had, it was not a secular government, so all of that was tied together. I could be wrong. In some ways, they were definitely. Yeah, exactly.
I think it
exactly. And the other thing I was thinking is that, like, there's probably been countless other examples of people that had awakening experiences. Maybe they're not like totally awake. I'm not even sure that I believe that that's possible. I'm not sure. I feel like total awakeness is probably death. You know, I think if we're incarnate on Earth, we're ego. I think that's what ego is aliveness. And that's a whole rabbit hole we could get into if we want to. But point being, like, you know, at any festival, any hippie festival ever in the history of, you know, humanity, there's been someone that's claiming that they're Christ. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's a glimpse of nirvana or heaven or the perfection of the divine. There's glimpses of that all the time. There's recognition that we are it, you know. And a lot of times we call those people crazy and put them in the nut house and stuff these days.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that happened a bunch. That's basically what happened with Jesus. You know, it was just for some reason he was able to speak so clearly, or he was able to somehow showcase his divinity in a way that people actually bought into it. That makes it sound perverted. Bought into it. Oh, like he was a, you know, scammer.
Yeah.
But that people actually believed him.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, he performed miracles.
Yeah.
That people witnessed, and they still weren't. There were some that still weren't willing to accept it. And
right.
What did they? How did they? Can't explain some of the stuff that he did.
Yeah.
But kind of like I said before, is when I said I'm like open-minded in anything is possible. So I'm not going to close my mind to the fact that he was the Messiah and that he may return, because if I do, that would exclude me from being saved, if that's really a thing as well.
Yeah.
So
I definitely don't buy into that personally.
But so like I my previous religion never said that I had to believe one thing to be saved. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm open to it, because hey, if that's the truth, then Holy Spirit, you know, come on in. Because Jesus says that he is with you always, and I do believe that through the Holy Spirit he is with you, and I believe that I for a long time was tapping into that before I even knew what it was, and I'm still not super ready to like define what I'm experiencing, because I don't know.
Yeah.
But I do know that it is God, it is source.
Yeah.
But it could be, I think that could be misunderstood by a lot of people. So.
Sure. Yeah. Which, you know, maybe if part of the lesson from Jesus is like, maybe not to preach about this type of stuff. Maybe, you know, relationship with the divine, it's okay for that to not have to be validated by other people and by the external mirrors and sacred mirrors that we were talking about earlier. But yeah, I don't know. First, I want to say something, and then I want to ask you something. And I want to say that I still struggle with the Jesus mythology, because to me it still feels like we're so enchanted by his ego. Like, Jesus was a person, he was an ego, and he was talking about something beyond ego, which is Christ. You know, we know that's not his last name. Like, those are different things. We all have Christ within us. I don't remember what it literally means, but isn't it like a Greek word for like the light or something like that?
I don't know.
I'm pretty sure it somehow boils down to something like that.
Yeah.
And he was trying to speak about how we all have Christ within us, but people weren't ready to hear that, so they're like, no, you got it, bro. You got it. Let's follow you. Let's make this whole religion, this whole institution that's come from it. And well, to preface it, I both do and do not believe every story that I hear that isn't in this present moment. So I both believe that Jesus was a physical incarnation, as much as I believe that, like, Frodo may or may not have been a physical incarnation. You know, like, who's to say in the infinite universe? Who's
Some
to
other
say?
dimension.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not that important to me whether or not Jesus was real, because the message of the mythology still is valuable, you know? And I think maybe some people will hear me say mythology and think that I'm like downplaying it, like, oh, it's just a fairy tale. No, it's a story. And just like any story, just like any movie you've seen, you know, we can resonate meaning and positive life affirming reflections from it, we can create that meaning, or it can just be whatever, just in one ear out the other, which is what the Bible was to me when I was in, grade school and high school. I went to Catholic school from, K through senior year. So I was reading this book every day in class, and it wasn't one ear out the other. Like, I went through a small phase in junior high where I really looked up to a teacher who was very religious, and I started to like really get into the religion, but I found myself in an energy of constantly judging everyone else, constantly trying to discern between, is this the devil or God, and it was just like, that was such a toxic energy for me to be in. I'm so grateful that I pretty quickly grew out of that and started to question all of this stuff.
Wow.
And massive props to the high school I went to, Roger Bacon. Possibly the best class I took there was World Religions. It was the one religion class where we weren't talking about Christianity. Nice. And I got privy to Buddhism and Hinduism. Awesome. And I was like so like lit up by those religions. I was like, oh, cool. Like there's other mythologies that have other things to bring to the table. And it wasn't this strict, like, rigid, this is how it is, and you're a sinner and you're going to hell if you're not believing in it and saved and stuff, you know, which brings us to the fear. And I think that fear and faith really do play off of each other like two sides of the same coin a lot. And on the more unhealthy side of things, I think that a lot of faith is rooted in fear, especially with the whole hell tactic with a lot of Christian culture. There's a lot of that, this idea that if you don't do it right, you're gonna suffer. And that's just such, to me that's such a toxic way of motivating people, especially to motivating them to like be one with the light, that just doesn't make sense to me. So that was a rant, but my question was, what's the deal with the whole like saved thing? Like, what's your relationship to that? What does that mean to you? Because you're saying if it is true.
Well, I do believe that we're not here for just this lifetime and that's it. Like, I think that there's definitely more, like, this is a blip, I think, in the grand scheme of things. I don't know. I don't really have, like, hard answers for what that looks like. I don't know if I believe in the devil. I don't know if I believe in heaven, if I believe in hell. Yeah. But I don't want to close any doors, In
case it's real?
In case it's real.
Well, don't you feel like that's rooted in fear, though?
No, because I feel like I've had glimpses of the light, and I want to be part of it.
I see. I feel that.
But what I do want to, what your question did remind me of a story that when I did first start learning about sins, and Jesus kind of talks about how, he says, if you believe in me, I will forgive all of your sins. And I used to think that meant like, oh, well, then you can keep sinning, and that's a cop-out, But I did start kind of playing around with that as like, okay, well, I would like pray before bed one night. I said, show me where I was counting all of my blessings before bed, and I was like, what have I missed? And then I was like, my children. And then I realized that like I've been seeing my children as more of a burden than a blessing. And so I said, help me to see, just like a prayer, help me to see my children as a blessing rather than a burden. And that night I had a dream that they died.
Oh, wow.
And so there's a little bit before this part where I was like, what do I have to do to get the Holy Spirit? Come on. Like, playing around with like muscle testing and like some other old spiritual stuff I know. And it was like, just ask for it. And I was like, okay, can I have the Holy Spirit? And it was like, no. I was like, well, what do I have to do? You said I could just ask. And I got nothing. So like later on, I was like driving, and I heard, I was listening to like one of the Bible study lectures, and it was saying something about how like God, Jesus wants you to cry out in desperation, and to really express how much you need him. And or he will give you an instance in your life where everything is stripped away so that you cry out in desperation. And I was like, well, that's crappy. Like, I don't want to lose everything. Like, can I just like be really grateful for what I have and have, cry out in desperation? And I was like, to muscle test, yes. And I was like, oh, okay. So I was like, God, I need you, like crying out, like, I don't want to lose everything, like, please. And it was like, can I have the Holy Spirit? And then I had to muscle test it, and it was like, yes. I was like, oh, I have the Holy Spirit? Yes. I was like, oh, all right. So then that was the next night that I asked about my kids, and then that I was given that dream, and maybe it was just my higher self, my subconscious, like, who knows? Like, I can't define what and why happened. But what happened was that I witnessed them die. And I woke up, my clock went off as soon as it happened. So like I couldn't even do anything about it. But I like dove back into the dream and was like, I have the anecdote. And I went back and I saved them, and it was fine. Wow. And then the rest of the 10 minutes of my snooze or whatever, I was just like, thank you, God, thank you. Like, I will never see them as a burden again. Like, I know how blessed I am to have them, and like, I know how it would feel to lose them, and I don't ever want to experience that again. Mm-hmm. And was just like crying out in desperation, essentially. And then there was another experience where I had that was like, Holy Spirit, show me where I'm sinning. And another like vision, I guess, came to me that I was kind of taking my husband for granted, and like all that he does for me and my family, and not really appreciating it. And it really brought up a lot of fear of like really falling deeper in love and losing him, and how terrifying that would be. And that's why I wasn't allowing myself to go there. Mm-hmm. But in processing all that, I'm like, I am so grateful for everything that he's doing, and I want to make sure he knows that. And it, I acknowledged that I had this fear of losing him, but allowed myself to go a little bit deeper. So since I've accepted the Holy Spirit or whatever, I do feel like I've had some direct experiences that have been, something that is deeper than what I had before. Mm-hmm. And other experience was just like feeling really guilty or shameful about a situation I like handled with my daughter. Like, I got angry when she went to bed, and I was like kind of stewing over that. And I was like, wait, I don't have to keep doing that. So I said, like, Holy Spirit, please take this away. And it was like instantly lifted. And it was just like things that I couldn't do before mm-hmm. were coming more easily and naturally. So it's something is different, something is working, and I'm going to keep going with it. So yeah, right on. But like I said, I can't tell you why or how or what's going to happen or what that means to be saved. Okay. But but I'm like, I want to experience this if it's legit, it's real. Gotcha.
A couple things are coming up for me. First of all, I totally respect that, because again, I think that's an example of how this type of engagement with scripture and with this template of spirituality, if you will, can be scaffolding for
deeper
growth.
Yeah.
What did you call it?
Deeper experience.
Yeah. And it seems like it brought up some shadow work for you, which is good things. I have actually, I think I'm gonna sort of just break down, I'll try to keep it really brief, my perspective on when it comes to belief and belief systems.
Cool.
So I feel and suspect that the human entity, the ego, is sort of like a computer that we can program with any sort of software. So
agreed.
Yeah, so when we're an infant, mm-hmm. we're an open canvas, and we're immediately being programmed mm-hmm. with software, with belief. Mm-hmm. what our name is, what our gender is, what it means to be a human on a planet, what the real world is, all that stuff, all that normal social conditioning, right?
And they say that happens between like the ages of 0 and 7. Or
Yeah.
0 and 3 even are really
Right.
the most formative years.
most
But by
formative, yeah.
7, it's like solidified.
Yeah, but even after then, you're right, that's going to be your core personality and your core beliefs. But even after that, we're still maintaining beliefs through the media that we're consuming, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
I do feel that it's possible to rewire ourselves, to remind ourselves, is kind of what I'm getting at with this whole thing.
Yeah.
I certainly haven't hacked it myself, I'm not claiming to know exactly how to do it, but I'm extremely interested in aligning myself with that. And so I feel like perhaps you're programming yourself with the software of that mythology, of that scripture, spiritual template. There's no right and wrong here, and that's the biggest difference of the feeling of where I orient myself spiritually, is that to me there is no right and wrong. There's just things that are in alignment with harmony, and there's things that are turning away from harmony. One thing that stood out to me, like kind of red flaggish from what you said, is you're quoting scripture and said that Jesus said something like, "I'll forgive all your sins if." I was like, bro, that's conditional love, that's conditional forgiveness, and it just doesn't, that doesn't fill me up, that doesn't inspire me, that brings about a lot of fear, actually. And it just reminds me that, like, thankfully I've positioned myself, and I know this sounds blasphemous to like hardcore Christians, but thankfully I've positioned myself to not need Jesus as a mediator between me and forgiveness, or me and love, or me and divinity, because much like I feel Jesus did, I feel like I have a direct connection with what it means to be in divine flow, and I deeply resonate with some of the ideals of Jesus, of compassion and forgiveness, and how necessary those things are for moving forward spiritually. But it's just because I know of the historical context of the religion, and I know how many times the Bible has been rewritten, reinterpreted, manipulated. It's hard for me. Yeah, exactly. It's hard for me to pick apart which parts of these are like spirit, words of spirit, and which of them are words of the power structures putting us in a position to be manipulated, and that, so I just wanted to share that.
Well, please don't quote me on the Bible, because I am a newbie, and I think that
fair enough. And to your point, it was what you needed, and it was something that allowed you to come to a deeper feeling and a different perspective, and I think that's all beautiful.
I totally agree with you, though. Like, it could have been easily manipulated and changed and modified by man for deception. But I really think you get out of it what you need. So, and it's interesting when you don't, I've noticed when I don't read it or digest it daily, I don't feel the same connection. And you take what resonates. Yeah. If it doesn't resonate, you leave the rest, as with anything. As with this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. As with anything, like you said. Yeah. Are you familiar with non-duality?
Not whole. Know that there's like non-duality.
Yeah.
About it.
Yeah, as like I don't know what to call it, but as like a philosophy or a epistemology of sorts. I was just curious. It's really what I've come across in the spiritual realms of verbalizing about spirituality. It's been what resonates the deepest with me, and it's essentially, as you could put together, going beyond duality. We live on Earth where we have day and night. We tend to categorize things as right and wrong, good and bad, sin and salvation, and all these things, and it's basically just blows all that out of the water to say that, like, just things happening in the moment. And one of the things that it kind of like points to is the idea that yeah, just to become really aware of like when we do create, how should I put it? I like the way I said it with the Jesus thing. When we create mediators between us and divine, to be aware of that. And you know, like you said, you were talking about like different spiritual methodologies that you've come across, and that like you would use them until they became
not effective.
Yeah, exactly.
Wasn't getting any deeper.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that made me think about the idea of like for instance, you know, Eckhart Tolle, like I would say that he's a non-duality speaker. I don't know if that he would call it that, but it's very much in that Zen sort of domain, Taoism, all those sorts of things I think kind of are within the non-duality sphere. But yeah, the idea of seeking, you know, I identified as a seeker, as a spiritual seeker for most of my life, and I think through things like non-duality, I've been reminded that like we're actually where we need to be, that we don't need to seek, we don't need to prove our deserving of salvation, we don't need to prove our ability to transcend suffering, you know. When I was a senior in high school, I read this book. It wasn't a class book, I just picked it up from that world religions class. I got very interested, and I picked up this book called God Is Not One. Stephen Prothello or something like that. His whole argument was that, you know how a lot of people say about religions, oh, different paths up the same mountain type of deal. There was a counter argument to that, basically asserting that each religion has a different goal in mind. With Christianity, it's salvation, you know, so there's this innate belief that we need to be saved from something. From what? From original sin, you know? And I choose not to believe that anymore. You know, that software to me has led to the function, because I'm more concerned and interested in the function of our belief rather than the belief itself. To me, we can substitute any beliefs. They're all neither right or wrong. They're just how we're orienting our experience, you know? I believe I'm a human, therefore I'm experiencing humanity. You know, if I didn't believe that, I would be experiencing something different, right? So it's not all just religious belief or spiritual belief. It's like, you know, I mean, that is a spiritual belief, to believe that we're human. You know, This is a story that we've been told. What if we were told that we were multi-dimensional beings from birth? You know, we would have an entirely different, there would be a different function of that belief.
I like that idea.
Yeah, so I'm very interested in the function of belief.
Cool.
And so I've decided to sort of leave that in the past, this idea that the idea of original sin, that there's something wrong with me for being an ego. Like, that doesn't feel good. That doesn't inspire me, you know? I prefer to see this as just a play place, that this is the flower unfolding, you know, the flower before it's bloomed. It's not judging itself for being a sinner, you know?
Right.
It's just being what it's being.
Right.
You know, it doesn't need to categorize itself as anything. It just simply is. And yeah, so to me, that's just what I really try to ground myself back into. Yeah. Obviously, I still have ego hang-ups and self-limiting beliefs and fear, absolutely, that is keeping me from being as free as I know that I could be. So what did you want to say about fear? It sounded like you had a story about that.
I do, and I don't know if we even have time for it at this point, but
Okay.
I grew up afraid of everything.
Yeah.
And so I have a big part of my journey has been to unravel the mind, the ego, the emotional fight or flight response, the how my core beliefs shape my perception of the world.
Yeah.
And reprogramming that, like you said.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of work on that, and I would say I don't recognize even the person I was a few years ago. A lot's changed.
Yeah. What kind of modalities have you used to reprogram yourself in those ways?
So, great question. I don't know if they have any names. I think intuitive guidance, connecting with others, learning from everybody.
Yeah.
One of the big things that I did was to start following my intuition. And that was a huge thing for me, because before that, I think I kind of squashed it because I didn't put any trust in it. And so I had an experience where I got to use it and had validation that it was accurate. And so I started to listen to it more and more and more, which guided me to sitting in sacred circles, and where I learned about like the mirror and shadow work. And each time we sat in sacred circle, though, we would whoever was facilitating it would call in the 4 directions. And I didn't know what that was. And so but like shortly after that, I started feeling like activated, like it's time, I'm ready, let's begin. But I didn't know what I was starting, so I was like feeling this really strong drive to get started, but I didn't know what I was starting. So I'm like, all I can do, and I kept trying to like put myself into these different boxes, like maybe it's this, maybe it's that, maybe it's that, but why it wasn't, or whatever. I'd explore each of these different things and it wasn't. And so I was like, I guess it's just to keep following my intuition and trust that it's going to lead me there. And so one of the things I did was I came across this online course of understanding the 4 directions, because I was like, we keep calling this in, and what are we invoking? Like, I don't know if that's a good thing. Are these people witches, or like, is that bad energy? And I just wanted to learn more. So I was like, I don't know what I'm starting, but I'm going to follow the path, and this is a yes. And so that experience is the story that I wanted to share, but it's pretty in-depth and detailed, and I probably could get through it, but I don't know if that's like the point,
we could save it
right?
for another. We could do another episode.
But it was very transformational, and illuminated the fact that I was living in this constant state of fear. And that it was time to let go of fear, and that around the same time just started trusting intuition. So shifting from fear to faith. And trusting that everything is gonna be okay, and everything's working out, and everything has meaning, and just coming to that conclusion that I'm connected to this creation, this universe. Like, I'm not out here on my own, walking blindly. Like, there's something greater going on, and that's definitely what's led me here today.
Awesome. Love it. Well, I look forward to hearing the full version.
Sorry to leave you hanging.
No, not at all. It gives us a little cliffhanger.
To be continued.
Totally. Awesome.
Because there's like every single thing in it was like synchronicity. To the point where I'm like, I can't deny this anymore. Cool. You got me on the edge of my pillow. Yay!
Well, one thing I like to ask at the end of an episode, is there anything, A, that you wanted to say that you didn't get a chance to say other than that story? And B, anything that came up that you just want to highlight, maybe something that we can like take into our day or to put into action, something like that.
Great questions. I truly feel that each one of us is our own unique expression of Source, and we're each given special gifts that are needed in the world. And when we're stuck in a place of fear and anxiety, we're not able to realize our fullest potential. So we have to figure out a way to move past fear, whatever that may be, and that may be different for everybody. But your gifts are needed, and each one of us is a piece of this puzzle, and I do feel like we are rising as a people, as a planet. I don't know what that means, but in order to get there, to this beautiful place that I've envisioned in my mind, where I said the light, I've seen the light, this place of peace is a place of harmony, and it's so beautiful. And in order to get there, each one of us has to shine. So figure out a way to get there. And you're not alone. Like nobody, you don't have to do it alone.
Yeah.
But you have all the answers within. So if you need to work with somebody else to unlock that,
right.
like, do it. But know that the ultimate goal is to unlock your own potential and your gifts.
Yeah.
Your gifts.
I love that.
So, yeah, we're all a piece of this
you.
puzzle, and I don't think it can really work without us all doing our part.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you. That's definitely something to meditate on, and really, you said it, that we're rising, or arising, or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's something I've been sort of postulating about recently, is like this idea of like rising, but also this idea of arriving. You know, because so much of our culture is this like forward thinking, like our satisfaction, our salvation, our enlightenment, our awakening is always
Out there.
Yeah, in the future,
point.
Once I've done
Good
enough,
point.
once I've proved myself enough, once I've whatever.
Yeah.
And while there's a seed of truth in that, I feel that only happens here when we arrive and where we are now.
Right.
And coming back to the Christlyhood of forgiveness and compassion, you know, to offer that to ourselves first and foremost, I feel like creates space to then muster some courage, you know, because I feel if I'm judging myself or ashamed, then I don't have a whole lot of energy to be courageous,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
So anyway, we'll cap it there.
Vulnerability and humility are two of the most beautiful human traits that I've ever witnessed.
Yeah.
So, gotta muster that up.
Start practicing.
Start
you
practicing,
know, it gets
yeah.
easier, right?
Yeah, but our latest album, Frequency Matters, is called Stepping In. And I think that goes along with what you're saying, is like,
Yeah.
yes, we are rising, and yes, we have this vision of this greater place, but like, we're here now. And we gotta live in the present moment. So.
Yeah, and there's
Arrive.
work to be done, and there's also bliss to be felt.
Right.
Right here,
Right
now.
now. Exactly.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sean.